In this session, I'd like us to focus on what I've termed the three unwholesome roots. That is greed, aversion, and delusion. They're also sometimes referred to as the three poisons. And they're very closely related to the three characteristics of anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, not self. So with greed and aversion and delusion, we are at the very seeds of what causes suffering in our lives. It's important to be clear as to what the Buddha meant by this idea of greed and aversion and delusion. Greed is the propensity of the mind to want. It is taking a natural response, that is, that there's some pleasant response to something that you experience, either in terms of the past or the present or the future, and then the mind forming going, oh, I really want that, I really want that. The pleasantness of the experience is not the problem, but rather our relationship to that pleasantness. When we idealize what is pleasant, then we fall into an attachment to getting it. If we already have it, we want to have more of it, or we want to keep it around. We cling to it. We become identified with it. It's referred to as taking birth. So we take birth in our wanting, and then we suffer inevitably. With aversion is when we do not want something. If we see it coming towards us, we want to avoid it. If it's already experienced, we want to relieve ourselves of this experience as soon as possible. So with aversion, when the motivation, again, is this idea that if we just didn't have this happening to us, if we didn't have to worry about this, oh, then things would be so great, I'd be so happy, I just know I would be. Now, we don't really say this to ourselves in that kind of particularized way, but it's how we act. So once again, we've taken birth in something unpleasant, either is happening or might happen or happened in the past, and we imagine a life without that, and we imagine it in a way that's incorrect. We imagine that it would bring a kind of permanent feeling good, a permanent happiness, a permanent peace of mind that's just not there. So we take birth in, we have become identified with, we've idealized this relieving of that which we feel aversion towards, and the whole cycle of suffering starts in that direction. Delusion is when we do not understand, in one sense, the three characteristics, that suffering is part of this life, not all of life, but part of life, that dukkha is just part of what happens in this realm. Or we fail to understand that things change, and we want things not to change, or we want to control how they change. But things just change. This is anicca. And then we identify with these various aspects of our experience, thinking that they're me and mine, and that is anatta, not self, the truth of not self. And our mistaken perception in that way is the primary delusion of all. So we can be very deluded in terms of what's happening in the moment. We can be very deluded about believing a story that we're telling ourselves. Many, many different examples of delusion that happen to us. Now, these three characteristics of greed and aversion and delusion can be attended to by mindfulness and by compassion and by loving kindness. So it's not that you're going to suddenly cease being a person who gets caught in really wanting something. That's not the goal in that way. The goal is, in this very moment, seeing if there is greed present in your mind. Are you clinging to, have you gotten consumed by, collapsed into, contracted into your wanting in such a way that it's distorting your life? And seeing the suffering that it causes. And as you see this over and over again in a non-judgmental way, that's where the compassion and the loving kindness come in. Because it doesn't help if you start judging yourself. Then you get into a battle with yourself. But you're just mindful with it. You go, oh, look at this wanting mind, and look at how it's adding to the misery of my life. I'm just wanting something here. It's okay that I want this, but my obsession with it, my being defined by it, this is causing suffering. And then in time, as you see that over and over again, it starts to break up or fade away, all on its own. The Dharma will do you. You do not have to do it. This is so hard for people to believe. So now, ask yourself, why would the Buddha have chosen these three as the unwholesome roots? Why might that be? He is pointing to the difference of our experience and how we relate to it. So in the First Noble Truth, he says there is suffering. He doesn't say all of life is suffering or that it's terrible that life is suffering. No, he says that part of living in this realm is the dukkha of this realm, the arising of pleasant and unpleasant moments, and they arise so much on their own. And so we have to find a relationship to the pleasant and unpleasant in life that is one of choice and not one where we're defined by our nervous system's immediate reaction to pleasant and unpleasant. Otherwise, we're like a puppet on a string being pulled one way or the other way. If the string is pulling us in a pleasant way, then we dance that way. If it's pulling us in the unpleasant way, we dance this way. And so our life becomes this puppet dance. I don't consider that much of a dance with life, to be doing that. It's a form of dance, and so much of human experience is based on that kind of puppet-like dancing. But the Buddha's pointing to a range of freedom that's far, far beyond this, where our way of relating to experience is not based on pleasant or unpleasant. So if it's pleasant, we want it. Therefore, we have the greed arise. If it's aversion, if it's unpleasant and we have aversion towards it, then, of course, we don't want it. And that's that puppet on the string. And then with delusion, we don't even notice what's going on, or we have this complete misunderstanding of what's going on, what would bring us happiness or not. And so these three roots of our suffering all have to do with how we're actually relating to experience in our daily life, both immediate and the big picture of our lives. You can say, but wait a minute, I don't go around spending every minute being caught in greed or aversion or being deluded. And my first answer to that would be, oh, you spend a lot more of those moments than you realize. I mean, a lot more. And that's why mindfulness is so important, is that as you start to see what's true moment to moment in your life, you will at first be a little dismayed over how many of your moments, this very moment, you're actually caught in wanting mind of one kind or another, or you're just not paying attention and therefore subject to whatever conditioning is being caused by the circumstances around you. It can really be shocking at first when you first encounter this. But yes, it's true, you're not always caught in your wanting mind, and you're not always filled with aversion. But you can have your moment, even a moment when it's a really good moment in your life, that you, in fact, are still in this feeling of wanting mind. So let's suppose that you're getting to visit with a friend that you really like spending time with, and you've not had a chance to be with this friend. And there you are, and it's really good. You're really catching up with each other, and it feels really pleasant. But then somewhere in the back of your mind, you start saying to yourself, I need to do this more often. What's wrong with me that I don't do this? And you start moving away from this moment where you're really quite happy to your ideas and your views and opinions about it, and saying, I'm just sloppy, or I'm not making this enough of a priority in my life. It's not that those recognitions of that you could be more skillful in relation to spending time with your friends are untrue or even unhelpful, but you have left the moment of your enjoyment. You've ceased to be present for your experience as it is. Or you start to feel that, this is too short a time. This is sort of, or, oh, I wish we weren't talking about this. She's going on and on about this. I wish we were talking about something else. And you lose this very essential value of wanting to spend time with your friend. That wanting it to be a little different in the conversation is greed. That's your wanting mind. Or it's your aversion to what is. In Buddhist psychology, these three unwholesome roots are used as a kind of typology to understand the habitual mind that we each have. So for myself, I am of the greed type. That is, I walk into a room and I look around and see, well, what might I want here? I don't think about doing that. It's just what my mind is doing. It appreciates the aesthetics of the room. It appreciates who's interesting in the room. It's very aware of what my mission is, what my purpose is in the room. That's the habit of my mind. It just moves that way. For you, you might have a mind like that as well, where that's what you primarily do, is to notice, first of all, what you want in a situation. Or your mind might be of an aversive type. So therefore, when you walk into a room, the first thing you notice is, oh, there's too many people in this room, or it's too cold in this room, or too hot in this room, or, oh, there's so-and-so that I don't like very much. And your orientation, your unconscious orientation, is to what is aversive to you so that you can avoid it. You're not aware of this. It's just a habit of mind. And you will act this out in one situation after another. Or you may be of the deluded type, so that your tendency of mind is to not notice. When you walk into the room, you don't really notice what the room's like one way or the other. You don't remember what your purpose is in being there. You don't pay attention to what would be skillful in the situation. You're just not paying that much attention. You go into a kind of confused state, or tuned out, or sort of, you're not quite in your body. You're just a little off from what's true in the moment. Now, each of us have all three of these, and as you've heard this description, you may have well said, "Oh, but I'm certainly a greed type, but I'm also an aversive type, and there's lots of times I'm deluded as well." And yes, it's true. You are all three of these types at one time or another. So at one time or another, you will be manifesting one of these. But for each of us, there is a primary one that we go to. And the way I teach this, that's not quite the way it was done originally, is I suggest that you are most likely habituated to two of these. So for myself, I am what would be referred to as a greed aversion type. So if once I've finished noticing what is I want in the room, I would notice what I don't like. Or if there's nothing in the room that I like at all, then I notice that I don't like anything in the room. That's just my nature. I tend to be in this mode of either the greed or the of aversion when I'm uneasy, or when I'm not sure what to do, or when I'm feeling rushed. The mind will just fall into this kind of thinking pattern. And if it's not attended to with mindfulness, it will cause suffering for myself and others. Now, you might be a deluded, aversive type. So you tend not to notice that much of what's going on. But when you do notice, it's around aversion. And therefore, you are either not paying attention, or you're unhappy with what's happening in some way. You've got this kind of pushing it away because of the aversion. And again, these are just habits of mind, but they are making you miserable in some way. And it may be a small way, just a little discomfort, but they may, in certain situations, be causing you a lot of discomfort. And in the same way, you could be aversive greed or aversive deluded. So we can be any combination of these of two of these three that would be our regular habits of mind. We don't cure ourselves of this, but rather we become mindful of our tendencies of mind. And by paying attention to them, we don't let them define us. So I walk into a room and I'm looking around to see, well, what do I need to do here? What's the feeling of this room? And I'm aware of, oh, the mind's got a little anxiety in it. Oh, you don't really know what you're doing here. You've not relaxed. So I just pause. I come back into my body and I remind myself of what I'm really about in this moment. And therefore I don't take birth in my greed or take birth in my aversion. The same for you. If you are deluded, you don't take birth in the delusion. You don't take birth in the aversion. You just notice it. You're not judging yourself as good or bad around it. You're just noticing what's true. There's one other thing that seldom gets mentioned, but I have found really useful. As I said, I am a greed aversion type. Well, so what happens when I have my moments of delusion? Which, of course, I do, but not that many of them. And therefore, when I am most likely to act unskillfully is when I'm having a moment of delusion, because I'm not accustomed to being in that state of mind. So I have learned by trial and error, by making lots of mistakes, how to hold true to myself when I'm having to deal with the tendency of the mind towards greed, towards wanting something, or towards not wanting something, the aversion. But I'm not so skilled in relation to the delusion. For you, it might be that with your deluded mind, you do very well when there is a sense of delusion present in your mind. You've become very skillful because you've made a lot of mistakes around that, so you've gotten used to it and you know how to respond. You don't go into extra confusion around it. You know what to do. You ask someone, you've developed these skills to cope with any situation where delusion is arising. And then since aversion is your second, then you've maybe not as much practice with that, but still you're pretty good when it comes to something that you're feeling aversion towards, where you don't act inappropriately, you don't say the inappropriate thing, you don't let it become something that makes you be in a bad mood for hours on end around it. You can drop it at some point. But when you get caught in wanting, oh boy, because you're not used to this wanting, and it makes you uneasy and you're disoriented, and you just really don't know how to cope with it. So therefore you may act unskillful, you may not in terms of getting what you want, or you may not be able to judge whether or not this is really something wholesome to be wanting, because you're just not used to this frame of mind in which to be working. So very useful to look at these, to see both for yourself and to notice for others. Oh, when this moment in this meeting, this person is really speaking from aversion. They're saying they don't like this project, but this is their habit. Every time anybody brings up something new, they're against it. Oh, that's really a big insight to know this. So I have to, in communicating with this person at work, I know I'm first going to get their aversion. Then once they've gotten that expressed, then they'll settle down and listen. I'm often asked, how do we work with greed and aversion and delusion? Because, of course, we have not uprooted these roots of suffering. We're going to have to face them every day. In each of these instances, we work with them through mindfulness, through loving kindness, and through compassion. So when the mind is caught in greed, we become aware of it because we've trained ourselves to be mindful moment to moment in our lives. Oh, this is just wanting mind. Oh, look at this, the way the energy is so gathered around wanting this particular thing. Oh, I can feel how I'm contracting into this wanting. I can feel the tension in my body, how stiff I'm getting. And I can see how rapidly my mind is moving around this wanting. I'm having all these images of getting what I desire and so forth. And that is enough. Being mindful of the greed in time will loosen it. We do not have to do the Dharma. The Dharma will do us. It's hard to have this be something you will accept, so you can only see this as true for yourself. And that requires this continuity of mindfulness. Over and over again, you notice greed is present. Greed feels like this. Greed is causing suffering for myself or for others. And the same with aversion. Oh, aversion is present. Aversion feels like this. You feel it in the body. You see how it's affecting the mind. You don't judge yourself. You don't label good or bad. You just label it as this is suffering. And in time, the mindfulness penetrates so deeply into the experience that the mind automatically lets go. The Dharma does you. The moment self-liberates. And of course, the same is true with delusion. In delusion, you're staying present through the mindfulness, and that presence of the mindfulness starts to counter in time the habit of the mind to be deluded. And it too is liberated in this very moment.